The night was dark, cloaked in heavy clouds that smothered the moonlight. Ariel worked by the dim glow of an oil lamp in her small hut, grinding herbs into a paste for one of the village elders. The rhythmic scraping of mortar against pestle was a comforting sound, a distraction from the strange unease that had settled in her chest all day. Her dreams had been vivid lately: fire, shadowed figures, and golden eyes that burned with intensity. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. A sharp knock at the door broke her concentration. Before she could answer, the door was flung open, and a man stumbled inside, his face pale with fear. "They're here," he gasped. "The beastkin are attacking." Ariel's heart leapt into her throat. She had heard tales of the beastkin, creatures who walked the line between man and beast, their strength and ferocity unmatched. They rarely ventured near human settlements, but when they did, it was for one reason: to claim. She grabbed her satchel, stuffed it with her essential supplies, and darted outside. The village was chaos. Flames licked at thatched roofs, and the air was thick with smoke and the sound of panicked screams. Shadows moved swiftly through the chaos, their forms too large and fluid to be human. Ariel ducked behind a stack of barrels, trying to calm her racing heart. She had to find a way to escape, to hide until the danger passed. But as she turned to flee, she felt it, a presence powerful and unyielding. Slowly, she looked up. Towering over her was a figure unlike any she had ever seen. His frame was massive, his body rippling with muscle beneath a layer of dark, scaled skin. His face was striking, both human and otherworldly, with sharp features and eyes that glowed like molten gold. Horns curved elegantly from his head, and a long tail flicked behind him. He was both beautiful and terrifying. Ariel couldn't move, her body frozen under the weight of his gaze. The creature, no, the man, stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. "You're the one," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. "The one I've been searching for." Before she could react, he reached for her, his large hand wrapping around her arm. His touch was surprisingly gentle, but his grip was unbreakable. Ariel thrashed against him, panic surging through her veins. "Let me go," she cried, but he didn't loosen his hold. "I can't," he said simply, his golden eyes never leaving hers. "You're coming with me." Ariel struggled harder, her fists pounding against his chest, but it was like hitting a stone wall. "Why? What do you want with me?" His gaze softened, just a fraction. "To protect you. To claim you." The words sent a shiver down her spine. She didn't have time to process it before he lifted her effortlessly into his arms. She gasped, her fists stilling as she was pressed against the heat of his chest. His scales were warm, almost soothing, and she could feel the steady rhythm of his heart beneath her palm. As he carried her away from the burning village, Ariel's mind raced. She had no idea where he was taking her or what he truly intended, but one thing was clear: she was no longer in control of her fate. They traveled through the forest at an impossible speed, the wind whipping through her hair. Despite her fear, Ariel couldn't help but notice how carefully he held her, his arms cradling her as if she were something precious. It was strange, this mix of fear and something else. She pushed the thought away, focusing instead on her surroundings. The dense trees soon gave way to rocky cliffs, and before long, they reached the mouth of a vast cavern. The man set her down gently, but his hand remained on her arm, a silent warning not to run. "Welcome to my home," he said, his deep voice reverberating off the stone walls. Ariel glanced around, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The cavern was enormous, with high ceilings and walls that glittered faintly with minerals. Torches lined the pathways, casting flickering light on the rugged terrain. Despite its intimidating appearance, the place had a certain beauty to it, a wild, untamed elegance. "Who are you?" she finally asked, her voice steadier now. "My name is Dane," he said. "I am the alpha of the Drakari, the dragonkin." "Dragonkin," she repeated, her mind struggling to comprehend. She had heard legends of the Drakari, but she never thought she'd meet one, let alone be abducted by their leader. You've been chosen, Ariel, Dane continued. You possess a power that can strengthen our kind, a power that only the strongest of your people carry. Ariel frowned. I don't have any power. I'm just a healer. Dane's lips curved into a small, almost amused smile. You'll see, he said, in time. She didn't know what to make of his cryptic words, but she wasn't about to sit idly by and wait for answers. You can't just take me from my home, she said, her voice rising. My people need me. They'll survive, Dane said, his tone firm but not unkind. You're needed here now. Ariel glared at him, frustration bubbling to the surface. You don't get to decide that. Dane stepped closer, his towering form casting a shadow over her. His golden eyes burned with intensity, but there was a softness to them, a depth that hinted at something more. You're right, he said quietly, but neither can I ignore what fate has placed before me. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the air between them thick with unspoken tension. Ariel's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to look away. She wouldn't let him intimidate her, no matter how powerful he was. Dane finally released her arm, stepping back. Rest, he said, gesturing to a nearby alcove where a bed of soft furs had been prepared. We'll talk more in the morning. Ariel hesitated, her instinct screaming at her to run, to fight, to do anything but comply. But she was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, and she knew she wouldn't get far in an unfamiliar world surrounded by Drakari. Reluctantly, she moved toward the alcove, keeping a wary eye on Dane. He watched her for a moment before turning and disappearing deeper into the cavern, leaving her alone with her thoughts. As she sank onto the furs, the events of the night replayed in her mind. Fear still clung to her, but so did curiosity. Who was Dane, really? And what was this power he spoke of? She didn't have the answers, but one thing was certain. Her life had changed forever. In the shadows of the cavern, she drifted into a restless sleep, her dreams once again filled with fire and golden eyes. Ariel awoke to the soft glow of torchlight and the faint echo of water dripping somewhere in the cavern. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The warmth of the fur bed and the soothing quiet made it easy to believe she was back in her village. But then she moved, and the soreness in her limbs reminded her of everything: the attack, the abduction, and Dane. She sat up slowly, her eyes scanning the cavern. It was larger than she had realized the night before, the walls carved with intricate patterns that seemed to tell a story. The air was cool but not unpleasant, and the faint scent of earth and stone was strangely calming. Before she could gather her thoughts, she heard footsteps approaching. Dane appeared from one of the side tunnels, his imposing figure silhouetted against the flickering torchlight. He carried a tray with what looked like fruit and dried meat, which he set down on a stone table near her bed. Eat, he said, his deep voice breaking the silence. You'll need your strength. Ariel hesitated, her stomach growling despite her lingering wariness. She reached for a piece of fruit, biting into it cautiously. It was sweet and tangy, unlike anything she'd tasted before. As she ate, she kept her eyes on Dane, who stood a short distance away, watching her with an unreadable expression. Why are you doing this? She finally asked, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. Why me? Dane crossed his arms over his chest, his golden eyes fixed on her. You carry a rare energy, he said. It's something only a few humans possess. With it, you can strengthen our bond, ensure the survival of my people. Ariel frowned, setting the fruit down. I didn't ask for any of this. You've taken me from my home, my people. I don't want to be part of your world. Dane's expression softened, though his voice remained firm. I understand your anger, but whether you accept it or not, our fates are now intertwined. The bond between us is already forming. Ariel's heart skipped a beat at his words, and she shook her head. There's no bond. I don't even know you. Dane stepped closer, his presence as overwhelming as ever. You will, he said quietly. In time, you'll see that this is where you're meant to be. Ariel looked away, her hands clenching the fur beneath her. She wanted to argue, to deny everything he was saying, but a part of her, a small, unsettling part, felt the truth in his words. There was something between them, an invisible thread that pulled at her in ways she couldn't explain. Dane knelt beside her, his hand reaching out to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. His touch was warm, his fingers rough but careful. "I don't wish to harm you, Ariel," he said, his voice low and earnest. "You're not a prisoner here. You are important." The weight of his words hung in the air, and Ariel found herself unable to look away from him. His eyes, so fierce and otherworldly, held a sincerity that made her chest tighten. For a moment, the tension between them shifted, the distance closing in an unspoken understanding. But before either of them could say more, the sound of approaching footsteps broke the moment. Dane stood, his expression hardening as another Drakari entered the room. This one was slightly smaller than Dane, with dark scales and sharp, piercing eyes. "Alpha," the newcomer said with a respectful nod. "The council wishes to speak with you." Dane's jaw tightened, and he glanced back at Ariel. "Stay here," he said, his voice firm. "I won't be long." Ariel watched as he left, the other Drakari following close behind. The cavern suddenly felt much larger, the silence pressing in around her. She rose from the bed, her eyes scanning the intricate carvings on the walls. They depicted scenes of battle, unity, and what appeared to be rituals. In the center of one mural, a figure that looked strikingly human stood beside a dragon-like beast, their hands joined. She reached out to trace the lines with her fingers, her mind racing. What exactly was this bond Dane spoke of? And why did it feel like something deep inside her was beginning to stir, as if awakening from a long slumber? Her thoughts were interrupted when a soft growl echoed from the shadows. She spun around, her heart pounding, but the sound was followed by a smaller, less threatening figure emerging from a nearby tunnel. It was a Drakari child, his wide, curious eyes peering up at her. Ariel relaxed slightly, offering a tentative smile. The child cocked his head, then took a few steps closer, his small claws clicking against the stone floor. "You're the human," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "Yes," Ariel replied softly. "And you're Drakari." The boy nodded, his gaze studying her with fascination. "You don't look like much," he said, his tone innocent but blunt. Ariel chuckled despite herself. "Thanks, I guess." The boy grinned, revealing small, sharp teeth. "Are you really going to bond with the Alpha?" The question caught her off guard, and she hesitated. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "It's complicated." The child's expression turned thoughtful. "The bond is special," he said. "It makes us stronger. My father says it's a gift." Ariel didn't know how to respond. She had been thrust into a world she didn't understand, surrounded by beings who viewed her as something more than human. But the sincerity in the child's words mirrored what Dane had told her, and it only added to the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. Before she could ask more, the sound of approaching footsteps signaled Dane's return. The child quickly scampered away, leaving Ariel alone once more as Dane entered the room. "Did he bother you?" Dane asked, his eyes briefly following the child's retreat. "No," Ariel said. "He was curious." Dane nodded, then turned his full attention back to her. "The council has agreed to give us time," he said. "They understand the importance of the bond, but are cautious about how it will affect both you and our people." Ariel crossed her arms, her gaze steady. "And what if I don't want this bond? What happens then?" Dane's expression darkened slightly, though his tone remained calm. "The bond has already begun to form. Denying it will only bring pain to both of us." His words sent a shiver down her spine, and she took a step back. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't choose this." Dane closed the distance between them, his gaze intense. "Neither did I," he said quietly, "but fate has chosen for us. Now, we must decide how to face it together." Ariel's breath caught as he reached out, his hand gently brushing against her arm. The warmth of his touch sent a spark through her, and for a moment, she felt the weight of his words. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Their journey was only just beginning. Ariel's days in the Drakari fortress quickly fell into an uneasy routine. She kept mostly to herself, exploring the vast network of caverns and trying to make sense of the strange carvings that lined the walls. Dane remained a constant presence, though he gave her space when she needed it. Despite her initial fear and resentment, she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. It was like a thread, invisible but unbreakable, drawing her closer with each passing day. One evening, Dane led her to a quiet chamber near the heart of the mountain. The room was lit by the soft, flickering glow of torches, and in its center was a shallow pool of crystal clear water. The air was warmer here, the heat radiating from the stone itself. "This is a sacred place," Dane said as he gestured for her to sit by the water's edge. "It's where our kind come to meditate and strengthen their bonds." Ariel hesitated, but eventually lowered herself onto the smooth stone. She watched as Dane knelt beside her, his golden eyes reflecting the light. "Why are we here?" she asked. "To begin the ritual," he replied. "It's not a single act, but a process, a series of trials meant to deepen our connection." Ariel tensed. "I didn't agree to this." Dane met her gaze, his expression steady, but not unkind. "You agreed to learn," he said. "This is part of that. If we don't complete the bond, the energy between us will become unstable. It could harm us both." The weight of his words settled over her, and for a moment, she considered walking away. But deep down, she knew there was no avoiding this. The bond was already there, an undeniable force simmering beneath the surface. If she didn't confront it, she would never truly be free. "What do I have to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dane's expression softened. "Trust me," he said, "and trust yourself." He reached out, his hand hovering near hers. Ariel hesitated, then slowly placed her hand in his. His skin was warm, the rough texture of his scales surprisingly comforting. As their hands touched, a ripple of energy passed between them, sending a shiver down her spine. Dane closed his eyes, his grip on her hand firm but gentle. "Focus on your breathing," he said. "Let the energy flow." Ariel did as he instructed, her breaths coming slow and steady. She could feel the warmth of the pool beside her, the quiet hum of the mountain around her. And beneath it all, she felt him, his presence, his strength, his steady heartbeat. It was as if their very essences were beginning to intertwine. Minutes passed in silence, the only sound the faint trickle of water. Then, without warning, a surge of energy coursed through her, sharp and intense. Ariel gasped, her eyes flying open as she pulled her hand away. "What was that?" she demanded, her heart racing. Dane opened his eyes, his expression calm but serious. "The bond is awakening," he said. "It will grow stronger with each trial." Ariel stared at him, her mind racing. The sensation had been overwhelming, but it hadn't been entirely unpleasant. It was as if a part of her she didn't know existed had been touched, stirred to life. "I don't know if I can do this," she said, her voice trembling. "You can," Dane said firmly. "You're stronger than you realize." His confidence in her was unsettling, but it also gave her a strange sense of reassurance. She wasn't alone in this, even if she didn't fully understand what this was. In the days that followed, Dane guided her through more rituals. Each one was different, but carried the same underlying purpose: to strengthen their bond and attune their energies. Some were simple, like meditating together or sharing quiet moments in the sacred chamber. Others were more intense, requiring them to push their limits and confront their fears. One night, after a particularly challenging trial, Ariel found herself sitting beside Dane on a ledge overlooking the cavern's central chamber. The view was breathtaking, with the glow of countless torches illuminating the intricate carvings and pathways below. "You've come far," Dane said, his voice low but filled with pride. Ariel glanced at him, her expression thoughtful. "I still don't understand why it has to be me," she said. "Surely there are others who could." "No, Dine interrupted. There's only you. The energy you carry is unique. It's not just about strength, it's about balance. You bring something to our bond that no one else could." His words were both a comfort and a burden. Ariel looked away, her thoughts swirling. She felt the weight of her responsibility, but she also felt something else, something deeper, more personal. Over the past few days, her feelings toward Dane had shifted. She still didn't fully trust him, but she couldn't deny the connection growing between them. As if sensing her thoughts, Dane reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. The warmth of his touch spread through her, soothing and grounding. "You're not alone in this," he said softly. "We face it together." Ariel turned to him, her eyes searching his. In that moment, the distance between them seemed to disappear. Slowly, almost hesitantly, Dane leaned in, his golden eyes locked on hers. Ariel's breath caught, but she didn't pull away. Their lips met in a soft, tentative kiss, the touch as light as a whisper. It was a moment of quiet vulnerability, a shared acknowledgement of the bond that had been forming between them. When they finally pulled apart, Dane's gaze held a newfound warmth, and Ariel felt a flicker of something she hadn't expected: hope. Before either of them could speak, a distant roar echoed through the cavern, shattering the quiet. Dane's expression hardened, and he rose to his feet, his body tense. "They've found us," he said, his voice low but laced with urgency. Ariel stood, her heart pounding. "Who?" "Rival clans," Dane said. "They'll stop at nothing to take what's ours." He turned to her, his golden eyes fierce. "Stay close to me. We'll face them together." Ariel nodded, her fear eclipsed by a sudden surge of determination. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she wouldn't face them alone. The air was thick with tension as Ariel followed Dane through the labyrinth of tunnels, his pace quick but controlled. Every step echoed off the stone walls, a reminder of the vastness of the Drakari fortress. The distant roars grew louder, their feral tones sending a chill down her spine. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dane glanced back at her, his expression grim. "The Onyx clan," he said. "They've been our rivals for generations. They seek to claim you for their own." Ariel's heart raced. She hadn't fully grasped the gravity of her position until now. The power Dane spoke of wasn't just a connection between them. It was a prize, a weapon that others would kill to possess. As they reached the central chamber, Dane's warriors were already assembling. The Drakari were an impressive sight, their scaled forms gleaming in the torchlight, their eyes burning with determination. Dane stepped forward, his commanding presence silencing the murmurs. "They come for what is ours," he said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "But they will not take it. We stand together, as we always have, and we will protect our home." The warriors responded with a unified roar, their resolve unshakable. Ariel couldn't help but feel a surge of admiration for them. They were fighting not just for survival, but for something greater, a shared purpose, a bond that went beyond blood. Dane turned to her, his gaze softer but no less intense. "Stay close to me," he said. "No matter what happens." Ariel nodded, her fear tempered by the trust she had come to place in him. She knew she couldn't fight as they did, but she wouldn't be a burden. She would find a way to help. The first wave of attackers came swiftly, their dark forms bursting through the main entrance with a feral intensity. The Onyx clan lived up to their name, their scales a deep, shimmering black that seemed to absorb the light. Their eyes glowed red, and their roars were like thunder. The clash was immediate and brutal. Drakari warriors met the invaders head-on, their claws and teeth gleaming as they fought with primal ferocity. Ariel watched in awe as Dane took the lead, his movements a perfect blend of strength and precision. He was a force of nature, his golden scales flashing as he struck down one opponent after another. But the Onyx clan was relentless. For every warrior that fell, another seemed to take their place. The air was filled with the sound of battle, roars, snarls, the clash of claws against stone. Ariel's heart pounded as she tried to stay out of the fray, her eyes constantly searching for Dane. Then she saw him, locked in combat with a particularly large Onyx warrior. The two clashed with brutal force, their blows sending shockwaves through the cavern. Dane was holding his own, but it was clear the fight was taxing him. Ariel's eyes darted around, searching for anything that could help. Her gaze landed on a loose torch hanging from the wall. Without thinking, she grabbed it and ran toward the fight. The heat of the flame was intense, but she ignored it, focusing on the warrior threatening Dane. "Hey," she shouted, waving the torch. The onyx warrior turned, his red eyes narrowing at her. For a moment, Ariel's courage faltered under his gaze, but she stood her ground. With a growl, the warrior lunged at her, but Dane was faster. He intercepted the attack, his claws raking across the warrior's chest. Taking advantage of the distraction, Ariel thrust the torch forward, the flames licking at the onyx warrior's face. He roared in pain, staggering back, and Dane seized the opportunity. With a final, powerful strike, he brought the warrior down. Breathing heavily, Dane turned to Ariel. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries. Ariel shook her head, adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "I'm fine," she said, "but we're not done yet." Dane gave a small, approving nod, and together they rejoined the battle. The fight raged on, but with Dane's leadership and the unwavering determination of his warriors, the tide began to turn. One by one, the Onyx clan fell, their advance slowing until finally they began to retreat. As the last of the invaders fled, a heavy silence fell over the chamber. The Dracarys stood victorious but weary, their bodies marked by the toll of battle. Dane surveyed the scene, his expression one of both relief and pride. "We've won," he said, his voice carrying through the chamber. "But this is only the beginning. They will return, and we must be ready." The warriors responded with a solemn nod, their resolve unbroken. Slowly, they began to disperse, tending to their wounds and preparing for what lay ahead. Ariel approached Dane, her legs trembling from the aftermath of the fight. He turned to her, his golden eyes softening as he reached out to steady her. "You were brave," he said, his voice low. "I just did what I could," Ariel replied, her cheeks flushing slightly under his praise. Dane's gaze lingered on her, a mixture of gratitude and something deeper. "You did more than that," he said. "You fought beside us. You proved that you belong here." Ariel felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. For the first time since she had been taken from her village, she felt a sense of belonging, a connection not just to Dane, but to his people. As the night wore on, the two of them found a quiet corner of the cavern to rest. They sat side by side, their shoulders barely touching, but the proximity brought a comfort neither of them could deny. "We'll face whatever comes next," Dane said, his voice a gentle promise. "Together." Ariel nodded, her heart steady. For now, they had a moment of peace, and she was determined to hold on to it for as long as it lasted. The days after the battle were marked by a tense calm. The Dracari fortress buzzed with activity as the warriors repaired the damage and fortified their defenses. The Onyx clan's attack had shaken them, but it hadn't broken their spirit. Ariel moved through the fortress, helping where she could, but a lingering unease stayed with her. She couldn't shake the image of the Onyx warriors' red eyes and the knowledge that they would return. Dane had been occupied with his council, discussing strategies and preparing for the next confrontation. His presence, once constant, now felt distant. Ariel found herself missing his steady reassurance, though she would never admit it aloud. Instead, she poured her energy into learning more about the Dracari. She spent time with the healers, observing their techniques and sharing her own knowledge of herbs. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the cavern in a soft amber glow, Ariel found herself alone in the sacred chamber. The pool of water shimmered, reflecting the light of the torches. She knelt by the edge, her fingers trailing through the cool surface. The quiet was soothing, a rare moment of peace amid the chaos. Lost in thought, Dane's deep voice broke the silence. Ariel turned to see him standing in the entrance, his golden eyes watching her intently. He looked tired, the weight of leadership evident in the tension in his shoulders. Yet, there was a softness in his gaze, a flicker of relief at finding her there. "Something like that," she replied, standing as he approached. Dane stopped a few steps away, his towering form casting a long shadow. The council is concerned, he said. They believe the bond is a distraction, that it weakens my judgment. Ariel frowned. Do you believe that? He hesitated, his eyes searching hers. No, he said finally. The bond is our strength, but it's new, untested. They fear what they don't understand. Ariel crossed her arms, her gaze steady. Then we prove them wrong. Dane's lips curved into a faint smile. You're braver than most warriors. She shrugged, though her heart quickened under his praise. I've had a good teacher. For a moment, they stood in silence, the tension between them shifting into something more tangible. Dane took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. The bond isn't just about power, he said softly. It's about trust, connection. Ariel's breath hitched as he reached out, his hand brushing against her cheek. His touch was warm, his fingers rough, yet gentle. Do you trust me, Ariel? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She hesitated, her mind racing. Trust had never come easily to her, but with Dane, it felt different. Despite everything, she had come to rely on him, to find comfort in his presence. Slowly, she nodded. Yes, she said. I do. Dane's eyes softened, a rare vulnerability breaking through his stoic exterior. Then we'll face whatever comes together, he said. Their gazes locked, the air between them charged with unspoken emotion. Slowly, Dane leaned in, his head dipping until their foreheads touched. Ariel's pulse quickened, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she closed her eyes, letting herself be drawn into the moment. The connection between them deepened, a silent exchange that transcended words. Ariel could feel his heartbeat, strong and steady, matching her own. It was as if their very souls were intertwining, the bond between them growing stronger with each passing second. When Dane finally pulled back, his eyes glowed with an intensity that made Ariel's breath catch. You're more than just my bonded, he said. You're my equal. The weight of his words settled over her, and Ariel felt a surge of determination. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she wouldn't face them alone. As the days passed, the tension in the fortress grew. The council remained wary, and whispers of dissent reached Ariel's ears. Some of the Drakari questioned her presence, viewing her as an outsider, a liability. But Dane's unwavering support silenced most of the opposition, at least for now. One afternoon, as Ariel helped the healers sort through their supplies, a familiar voice called her name. She turned to see Tarek, one of Dane's closest allies, approaching. His dark scales gleamed in the light, and his expression was unreadable. Ariel, he said, inclining his head, the council wishes to speak with you. Ariel's stomach tightened, but she nodded. Lead the way. Tarek guided her through the winding tunnels to the council chamber, where the elders sat in a semicircle, their expressions grave. Dane stood to one side, his arms crossed over his chest, his jaw set in a hard line. Ariel, one of the elders began, his voice low and authoritative. We have called you here to address our concerns. The bond between you and Dane is unprecedented. While it has brought strength, it has also brought risk. Ariel met the elder's gaze, her back straight. What do you want from me? Another elder leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Prove your worth, he said. Show us that you are more than a burden. Ariel clenched her fists, but before she could respond, Dane stepped forward. She's already proven herself, he said, his voice a growl. She fought beside us, saved lives. She's earned her place. The council murmured among themselves, their expressions skeptical. Finally, the first elder spoke again. We will allow her to remain, he said, but the bond must be tested. The next trial will determine if she is truly one of us. Ariel's heart pounded, but she forced herself to stay calm. What kind of trial? The elder's gaze was piercing. You will face the flame. If you can withstand its power, you'll be accepted as a Drakari. Ariel glanced at Dane, who gave her a small, reassuring nod. I'll do it, she said, her voice steady. The council seemed satisfied, and the meeting adjourned. As they left the chamber, Dane placed a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. Ariel shook her head. Yes, I do. If I'm going to stay here, I need to prove myself. Dane's grip tightened slightly, his expression conflicted. You're stronger than they realize, he said, and I'll be with you every step of the way. Ariel managed a small smile, her determination unwavering. The trial would be her chance to prove not only to the Drakari, but to herself that she belonged. Whatever the flame held, she would face it head on. The Chamber of Flames was unlike anything Ariel had ever seen. The room was circular, its walls carved with ancient runes that pulsed faintly with an inner light. At its center stood a large, stone basin filled with a shimmering, golden fire. The flames danced and flickered, but there was no smoke, only a heat that radiated throughout the room, wrapping around her like a living entity. The council members stood along the perimeter, their expressions solemn. Dane was there too, his golden eyes locked on her, a mix of pride and worry etched into his features. Ariel drew a steadying breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt the weight of their gazes, but most of all, she felt the gravity of what lay before her. The trial of the flame is a test of will and spirit, one of the elders intoned. It will reveal your true nature and your worthiness to walk among us. Ariel nodded, her resolve firm. She stepped forward, her boots echoing against the stone floor as she approached the basin. The heat intensified with each step, but she didn't falter. She could feel the energy of the flames calling to her, both a challenge and an invitation. Dane's voice reached her just as she reached the edge. Ariel, he said softly, his tone a tether grounding her. Remember, you're not alone. She glanced back at him, drawing strength from his presence. Then, without another word, she extended her hands over the flames. The heat was blistering, but she kept her hands steady. Slowly, she lowered them into the fire. The moment her skin touched the golden flames, a surge of energy shot through her, unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was as if the fire was alive, wrapping around her hands, moving up her arms in tendrils of light and warmth. She gasped, but not from pain. The fire wasn't burning her, it was filling her, testing her. Visions flashed before her eyes, scenes of her past, moments of doubt and fear, but also of strength and resilience. She saw her village, the people she had left behind, and the life she thought she would live. Then the images shifted, showing her time with the Drakari, the battles, the quiet moments, the bond she had begun to forge with Dane. The fire seemed to weigh these memories, as if judging her. Ariel's legs trembled, but she held her ground. The flames pulsed in time with her heartbeat, growing brighter and stronger. They seemed to recognize her, to accept her. She could feel the bond within her solidifying, not just with Dane, but with the Drakari as a whole. Then the flames changed. They turned from gold to a deep, fiery red, and the warmth shifted to an almost unbearable heat. The energy around her grew wild, chaotic, and a voice echoed in her mind, dark and guttural. Asterisk, you are not enough. You are weak. You will fail. Asterisk. Ariel gritted her teeth, her hands clenching within the fire. No, she whispered, her voice steady despite the doubt clawing at her. I've come too far to fail. The fire seemed to resist her, pushing back, but Ariel pushed harder. She thought of everything she had endured, the strength she had discovered within herself. She thought of Dane, his unwavering belief in her, and the bond they shared. She wouldn't let fear or doubt control her. The red flames began to waver, their intensity dimming as Ariel's resolve grew. Slowly, the fire returned to its golden hue, its energy once again warm and steady. Ariel felt a surge of triumph as the flames seemed to embrace her, their light spreading through her entire body. When she finally pulled her hands back, they were unscathed, glowing faintly with the residual energy of the fire. The chamber was silent, the council members watching her with a mix of awe and respect. One of the elders stepped forward, his expression unreadable. You have passed, he said, his voice carrying a weight of authority. The flame has deemed you worthy. Ariel exhaled, relief flooding through her. She turned to Dane, who stepped forward to meet her. His eyes shone with pride as he reached out, taking her hands in his. "You did it," he said, his voice low but filled with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied, her gaze steady. Dane's grip tightened slightly, his warmth grounding her. "You're stronger than you know," he said. "You've proven that to all of us." The council dismissed them shortly after, and the two of them left the chamber together. They walked in silence for a time, the weight of the trial still lingering in the air. When they reached a quieter part of the fortress, Dane stopped and turned to her. "Ariel," he said, his tone serious. "I know this has been overwhelming, but you've shown more courage than anyone could have expected. You've earned your place here." Ariel felt her chest tighten, his words touching something deep within her. "It hasn't been easy," she admitted, "but I don't regret it. I feel like this is where I'm meant to be." Dane's expression softened, and he reached out, cupping her face in his hand. "You're meant to be here," he said. "With us. With me." The distance between them closed as he leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. Ariel's heart raced, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she closed her eyes, letting the moment wash over her. Their bond pulsed between them, a steady, unbreakable connection. When their lips met, it was gentle at first, a soft brush that quickly deepened. Ariel's hands found their way to Dane's shoulders, his warmth enveloping her. The kiss was a promise, a reaffirmation of everything they had fought for and everything they would face together. When they finally pulled apart, Dane's gaze was intense but tender. "No matter what comes next," he said, his voice a quiet vow, "we'll face it together." Ariel nodded, her resolve stronger than ever. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't alone. The night was quiet, a deceptive calm settling over the Drakari fortress after the intensity of the trial. Ariel stood on a high ledge overlooking the vast expanse of the mountain range. The cool night air kissed her skin, and the stars above seemed to stretch endlessly. She wrapped her arms around herself, her mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. She had passed the trial, but the weight of what it signified still lingered. The council now acknowledged her as one of their own, yet their acceptance came with expectations. She wasn't just another member of the clan. She was bonded to Dane, a connection that carried immense power and responsibility. That power would be tested, and the next challenge was already on the horizon. The sound of approaching footsteps drew her from her thoughts. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. Dane's presence was unmistakable, his quiet strength filling the space around him. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said softly, coming to stand beside her. "I needed some air," Ariel replied, her voice equally quiet. "It's hard to believe everything that's happened." Dane nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The trial was only the beginning. The Onyx clan won't stop, not after their last defeat. Ariel looked at him, her chest tightening at the tension in his expression. "What's their next move?" "They'll regroup and strike again," Dane said, his tone grim. "But this time, they'll come with more than brute force. They'll try to break us from within." Ariel frowned, a sense of unease settling over her. "What do you mean?" Dane turned to face her, his golden eyes serious. "They'll target the bond," he said. "Our connection is our greatest strength, but it also makes us vulnerable. If they can disrupt it, they'll weaken us." The implications of his words hit her like a wave. The bond between them wasn't just a personal connection, it was a link that could influence the entire clan. If the Onyx clan found a way to exploit it, the consequences could be devastating. "Then we can't let them," Ariel said, her voice firm. "We have to be ready." Dane's expression softened, a hint of pride in his eyes. "We will be," he said, "but we'll need to trust each other completely." Ariel felt the weight of his words. Trust had been a difficult journey for her, but with Dane, it was different. He had proven time and again that he would stand by her, no matter the cost. "I trust you," she said, her voice steady. Dane reached out, his hand gently cupping her face. "And I trust you," he said. "Together, we'll face whatever comes." Their eyes locked, and the world around them seemed to fade away. Slowly, Dane leaned in, his lips brushing against hers and a tender, lingering kiss. It was a moment of quiet strength, a reaffirmation of their bond. When they pulled apart, Dane rested his forehead against hers. "We'll need to strengthen the bond," he said. "The deeper our connection, the harder it will be for them to break it." Ariel nodded, her resolve firm. "How do we do that?" Dane stepped back, his gaze thoughtful. "There's a ritual," he said. "One that will solidify our bond and protect it from outside influence. But it's not without risk." "What kind of risk?" Ariel asked, her heart pounding. "The ritual requires complete vulnerability," Dane explained. "It will expose every part of who we are, our fears, our desires, our very essence. If we're not fully aligned, it could fracture the bond instead of strengthening it." Ariel swallowed hard, the gravity of his words sinking in. The thought of opening herself up so completely was terrifying, but she knew it was necessary. "When do we begin?" "Tomorrow," Dane said. "The moon will be at its peak, and the energy in the mountain will be strongest." Ariel nodded, determination hardening her resolve. "Then we'll face it together." The following night, the sacred chamber was prepared for the ritual. The air was thick with the scent of burning herbs, and the golden flames in the basin burned brighter than ever. The runes on the walls pulsed with a rhythmic energy, casting the room in an otherworldly glow. Ariel stood at the center of the chamber, her heart racing as she waited for Dane. She wore a simple white tunic, its fabric light and flowing. The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation, the weight of what they were about to do pressing down on her. Dane entered the chamber moments later, his golden scales catching the light. He moved with a quiet grace, his eyes locked on her. He wore a similar tunic, his imposing figure both commanding and reassuring. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low. Ariel nodded, her breath steady despite the nervous energy coursing through her. "Yes." Dane stepped closer, his hand reaching out to take hers. Their fingers intertwined, and Ariel felt a surge of warmth and reassurance. Together, they turned to face the basin, the flames flickering in response to their presence. "The ritual will bind our energies," Dane said. "We must be completely open, completely honest. No barriers, no fears." Ariel swallowed hard but nodded. "I'm ready." Dane began to chant in the ancient Drakari tongue, his voice low and melodic. The flames in the basin rose higher, their light intensifying. As he chanted, Ariel closed her eyes, focusing on the bond between them. She felt the energy begin to flow, a warm current that started in her chest and spread outward. It connected with Dane's energy, their essences intertwining in a dance of light and heat. The sensation was overwhelming, but Ariel didn't resist. She let herself be carried by the current, her trust in Dane anchoring her. Images began to form in her mind, memories, fears, hopes. She saw herself as a child, alone and unsure. She saw the moment she was taken from her village, the fear and confusion that had consumed her. But she also saw her time with Dane, the strength she had discovered within herself, the bond they had forged. She felt Dane's presence beside her, his energy steady and strong. His memories flowed into hers, and she saw glimpses of his past, his struggles as a leader, the weight of his responsibilities, the pain of loss. But beneath it all, she felt his unwavering determination and his deep connection to her. The energy between them grew stronger, the light around them pulsing in time with their shared heartbeat. The bond solidified, an unbreakable connection that resonated through every fiber of their being. When the ritual finally ended, the flames in the basin dimmed, and the room fell silent. Ariel opened her eyes, her breath coming in steady but shallow. Dane was still holding her hand, his gaze filled with a quiet intensity. "It's done," he said softly. "The bond is unbreakable." Ariel nodded, a sense of peace settling over her. She could feel the strength of their connection, a constant presence that would guide them in the battles to come. No matter what the future held, they were ready. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. The aftermath of the ritual left an unshakable sense of unity between Ariel and Dane. The bond was no longer just a tether of power. It was a living, breathing connection that pulsed with shared purpose. Ariel felt it constantly now, a steady, reassuring presence that calmed her fears and sharpened her focus. She could sense Dane even when he wasn't near, feel the steady rhythm of his thoughts and emotions like a second heartbeat. The morning after, the fortress was alive with preparation. The Onyx clan had been spotted at the far edge of the mountain, their forces gathering for another assault. The Drakari were readying themselves for the inevitable clash, their movements purposeful and efficient. Ariel moved among them, her presence no longer met with wary glances or whispered doubts. She had proven herself, and now she was one of them. Dane stood at the center of the main chamber, issuing orders with the calm authority of a seasoned leader. His golden scales caught the light, and his voice carried with it a sense of unyielding confidence. When he finished, his gaze found Ariel, and he motioned for her to join him. "How are you feeling?" he asked as she approached. "Ready," she said, her voice firm. "Whatever comes, I'm ready." Dane's expression softened, and he reached out, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder. "We'll face it together," he said. "And this time, they won't catch us off guard." Ariel nodded, her resolve unshakable. She had faced her fears in the trial of the flame, and now she would face whatever the Onyx clan could throw at them. As the day wore on, the tension in the fortress grew. The Drakari warriors assembled in the outer courtyards, their weapons gleaming and their expressions fierce. Ariel joined the healers, preparing supplies and reinforcing their makeshift infirmary. She knew the battle would be brutal, and she wanted to be ready to help however she could. Just as the sun dipped below the horizon, the first signs of the enemy appeared. A low, guttural roar echoed through the mountains, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. The Onyx clan emerged from the shadows, their dark forms a stark contrast against the fading light. They moved with a terrifying purpose, their red eyes glowing like embers. Dane led the Drakari to the front lines, his presence a beacon of strength. He raised a hand, signaling for silence, and the warriors fell into a tense stillness. Then, with a single word, he unleashed them. The clash was immediate and deafening. The Drakari met the Onyx warriors with a ferocity that shook the very ground. Claws and blades clashed, and the air filled with the sounds of battle. Ariel watched from a higher vantage point, her heart pounding as she tried to focus on her role. She moved quickly between the injured, her hands steady as she applied salves and bandages. The bond with Dane was a constant in her mind, a guiding force that kept her calm. She could feel his strength, his determination, and it gave her the resolve to keep going. But the Onyx clan was relentless. For every warrior the Drakari brought down, another seemed to take their place. The tide of battle shifted constantly, and it became clear that the Onyx were not here to simply overpower. They had a strategy. Ariel's suspicions were confirmed when she saw a group of Onyx warriors break away from the main fight, moving toward the fortress's inner chambers. They were targeting the heart of the Drakari stronghold. She didn't hesitate. Grabbing a nearby blade, she ran to intercept them, her heart racing. The bond pulsed within her, and she felt Dane's awareness shift toward her. "Be careful," his voice echoed in her mind, a blend of concern and resolve. Ariel met the Onyx warriors head-on, her movements guided by instinct and the energy flowing through her. She ducked beneath a wild swing, her blade finding purchase in the side of one warrior. Another lunged at her, but she rolled away, narrowly avoiding his claws. The fight was intense, but Ariel held her ground. She moved with a confidence she hadn't known she possessed, her every action a testament to the bond she shared with Dane. She wasn't alone, and that knowledge gave her strength. Just as she began to feel the tide turning in her favor, a sharp pain shot through her side. One of the Onyx warriors had managed to land a blow, his claws raking across her ribs. She stumbled, but before the warrior could press his advantage, a golden blur crashed into him. Dane stood protectively in front of her, his eyes blazing with fury. In a swift, brutal motion, he dispatched the Onyx warrior, his claws slicing through the air with deadly precision. The remaining Onyx hesitated, their confidence faltering in the face of the Alpha's wrath. You will not touch her, Dane growled, his voice a deadly promise. The Onyx warriors retreated, their leader calling them back to regroup. Dane turned to Ariel, his expression softening as he knelt beside her. His hands hovered over her injury, his touch gentle but urgent. You're hurt, he said, his voice thick with concern. It's not bad, Ariel replied, though her face was pale. I'll be fine. Dane didn't look convinced, but he helped her to her feet, his arms steadying her. The bond between them pulsed with a comforting warmth, and Ariel felt her strength returning. We need to end this, Dane said, his eyes narrowing as he looked toward the battlefield. They won't stop until we make them. Ariel nodded, determination hardening her features. Then let's finish it. Together, they rejoined the fight, their presence a rallying force for the Drakari. The warriors pushed back against the Onyx clan with renewed vigor, their unity and strength driving the enemy to the brink. As the battle reached its climax, Dane and Ariel found themselves face to face with the Onyx leader. He was massive, his dark scales gleaming with a sinister light. His eyes burned with hatred as he squared off against them. You think your bond makes you invincible? He sneered. You're nothing but a weakness. Dane's grip on his weapon tightened, and he stepped forward, his golden eyes blazing. Our bond is our strength, he said, and it will be your downfall. With a roar, the Onyx leader charged, and the final confrontation began. The Onyx clan leader towered over Dane and Ariel, his dark, armored form radiating malice. His claws gleamed in the flickering torchlight, and his crimson eyes burned with a hatred that seemed to pierce the very air. He let out a guttural roar, the sound reverberating through the battlefield and sending a shiver down Ariel's spine. Dane stood firm, his golden scales catching the light as he raised his blade. His stance was steady, his eyes locked onto his opponent with unyielding focus. Beside him, Ariel gripped her weapon tightly, her determination mirroring his. The bond between them pulsed with a steady rhythm, a shared energy that filled her with strength. You should have surrendered when you had the chance, the Onyx leader snarled, his voice a deep growl. Now, you'll die along with your little human. Dane's eyes narrowed, a flicker of fury crossing his face. We will never surrender, he said, his voice calm but laced with steel. And she is more than you will ever understand. With a roar, the Onyx leader lunged forward, his claws slicing through the air. Dane met his attack head-on, their blades clashing with a thunderous impact. Sparks flew as the two alphas engaged in a brutal dance of power and precision. Each strike was calculated, each movement a deadly exchange. Ariel circled around, searching for an opening. She knew Dane could hold his own, but she also knew this fight was not his alone. Their bond was a partnership, and she wouldn't let him face this enemy without her. Spotting an opening, she darted forward, her blade aimed for the Onyx leader's exposed flank. The Onyx leader snarled as her strike landed, the blade cutting through his armor and drawing dark, viscous blood. He spun around, his massive arms sweeping toward her. Ariel ducked, narrowly avoiding the blow, but the force of it sent her stumbling back. Dane seized the moment, his blade slicing through the air with deadly precision. The Onyx leader roared in pain as the strike landed across his chest, the golden blade leaving a searing wound. The enemy staggered, but quickly recovered, his rage driving him forward. You'll pay for that, he bellowed, his claws aimed for Dane's throat. But before he could land the blow, Ariel surged forward, her blade intercepting his strike. The impact sent a shockwave through her arms, but she held her ground. The Onyx leader's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment, he faltered. Dane didn't hesitate. With a powerful roar, he launched himself at the enemy, his blade striking true. The Onyx leader staggered back, his armor cracked and his movements slowing. His breaths came in heavy, labored growls, and it was clear he was losing his strength. You've already lost, Dane said, his voice steady and resolute. Leave now, and you might still save your clan. The Onyx leader's eyes flickered with a mix of rage and desperation. He glanced around, seeing his warriors falling back as the Drakari pressed their advantage. The battle was turning, and he knew it. This isn't over, he snarled, his voice low and venomous. I'll return, and when I do, you'll regret ever challenging me. With a final glare, he turned and retreated, his warriors following close behind. The Onyx clan disappeared into the shadows, their roars fading into the distance. As the battlefield fell silent, a collective sigh of relief swept through the Drakari. They had won, but the cost had been high. Ariel lowered her weapon, her body trembling from the adrenaline and exertion. She turned to Dane, who was already by her side. You were incredible, he said, his voice filled with pride and relief. You stood your ground and fought with everything you had. Ariel managed a small smile, her chest heaving as she caught her breath. I couldn't have done it without you. Dane reached out, his hand cupping her face gently. His golden eyes softened, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to fade away. We're stronger together, he said, his voice a quiet promise. Their eyes met, and without hesitation, Dane leaned in, pressing his lips to hers. The kiss was both fierce and tender, a testament to everything they had fought for and everything they had become. Ariel's heart swelled as she melted into him, their bond pulsing with a steady warmth that filled her with a sense of belonging. When they finally pulled apart, Dane rested his forehead against hers. We did it, he said softly. The Onyx clan won't recover from this for a long time. Ariel nodded, her resolve firm. But they'll be back. Dane's expression hardened slightly, but there was a flicker of determination in his eyes. And we'll be ready, he said. They'll never break what we've built. The days that followed were a blur of rebuilding and recovery. The Drakari worked tirelessly to repair the damage from the battle, their spirits bolstered by their victory. The council, once wary of Ariel, now looked to her with respect and gratitude. She had proven herself not only as a warrior, but as a vital part of their clan. Dane and Ariel spent their evenings together, their bond growing deeper with each passing day. They spoke of the future, of the challenges they would face, and the strength they would draw from each other. The mountain fortress, once a place of uncertainty and isolation, now felt like home. One night, as they stood together on the same high ledge where they had first pledged their unity, Dane wrapped his arms around Ariel, holding her close. The stars above them shone brightly, and the cool night air carried the promise of new beginnings. No matter what comes, Dane said, his voice steady and sure, we'll face it together. Ariel leaned into him, her heart full. Together, she echoed. And for the first time in her life, she felt truly at peace.